Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, divine miracles. Bruno spoke of human beings as a göttliches Wunder, which means a divine miracle, wonder, marvel, a truly marvelous thing. So let's right here, right now, take on that. We'll either take on that truth or check in. Is it true? Am I, not just meaning me, but each person here, am I a divine wonder? Am I a miracle? Am I a divine creation? Let's take a moment and really reflect on this and see, is that true? I was raised with the idea that I was a sinner or an evil or a faulted person. And that's sadly a very common belief today. Now, Bruno Groening said that we were a göttliches Wunder, a divine wonder and marvel. But he also pointed out that, um, very simply, that human beings really didn't know much anymore and that they'd really strayed from that goodness, from the good path, both the good way of life and the goodness within them. And so there's this recognition of, I believe Bruno called us to recognize that inner divinity, that inner goodness, and to recognize and reflect on the ways in which that we've succumbed to evil and fallen away from that good path and fallen away from connection with that inner divinity, that inner goodness. But he's given us such a simple way to reconnect, a very simple, natural, even pleasurable way to find our way back to ourselves, back home. So, to do that, please sit with your legs uncrossed, feet flat on the floor, hands on your legs, palms facing upwards, back in a nice upward position, not stiff, but not slouched over either, just a nice relaxed upright position. And then close your eyes and hand over all burdens, all worries, all troubles to life, to God, to a spiritual helper you trust. Resentments, fears, unburdening yourself. And think of something that makes you smile. And then begin to observe the body. If it feels right, asking God, asking Bruno or another spiritual helper to help you have the divine connection. And then observing the body, noticing what you feel, having the will, the intention to take in good energy. Observing the body, taking in the good. Noticing what you feel. Trusting that every sensation is as Bruno said, is a step towards your healing. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. Very warm welcome to everyone who's joining in. And a warm welcome to our friend Bruno Groening, who said that, in essence, he said that he's with us always. So, guidance. What are we guided by? Bruno Groening pointed out that our thoughts move us to deeds. The German word bewegen, hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, it literally means to move with force. Has a little bit of the sense of cajole or to push in a certain direction. That we're really, so the thoughts we take in are essential. And over, Bruno called us to be mindful of our thoughts. He said, beware of every evil thought. So when we catch a negative thought, we have to just give it away and firmly say no. Otherwise, we're saying yes and we take it in, and that thought will have some kind of effect. Bruno said thoughts are forces. It's a very simple yet very profound statement. So in post-World War in post-World War II Germany, there was a lot of what you could call occult and psychic things going on. Seances, automatic writing, pendulum, many in not just in Germany, but in Europe in that time. There was a bit of a metaphysical or an occult renaissance happening. And Bruno Groening was advised people to be very cautious about what they involved themselves with. And I'd like to read something he wrote about the pendulum. Bruno Groening, this is from Powers of the Spirit, page 45. And for those who don't know, a pendulum is you hold something that a piece of rope or a small metal chain that has an object on the end, and you ask questions. And theoretically, the pendulum moves in a certain direction to give you a yes or a no. And here's what Bruno Groening had to say about the pendulum. It is very difficult for people today to discriminate between what is true and what is false. You have all received an education, in German, Bildung, though for most of you, this is a delusion, Eidbildung. That is why using the pendulum, just like, for example, automatic writing, is so dangerous, because no one can check from which side these suggestions are coming. In most instances, it is the evil side, which wants to lure inquisitive and weak-minded people onto the wrong track. So, guidance. The thing is if I use a pendulum, I very well may get an answer. But the question is, what is the source of the answer? And here's what, and according to Bruno Groening, most times when people use something like a pendulum, like automatic writing, he was also very critical of what we would call today channeling. Back then they called it more seance, or I believe listening to spirits, I don't know. He said more often than not, it's, as we read right here, it's something evil that's trying to trick people. So we need to be very and go out and take a walk. Now, the thing is, I think it just cut out for one moment, so I'll repeat that. So let's say I'm meditating, I'm tuning in, and I hear a voice that says, it's time for you to stand up, go outside, take a walk. Now, it doesn't mean, Bruno wasn't saying that it's wrong, that's hearing voices or using a pendulum is wrong. It's that we need to check. If I just say yes to that voice without checking in, that's literally giving my power to something and I don't even know what. It could be the voice of God. It could be the voice of something serving the devil, serving evil. So we really need to be mindful of such things. And Bruno Groening advised extreme caution. Um, so let's sit with all this, not just the specifics of a pendulum, but the specifics of, Bruno called people to follow God. And the way he said to do that was to listen deeply inside yourself, to where your conscience is, to what he called our natural human instinct, which um, I believe is another a way of just saying our soul, that part of us that is connected to God, that does know right from wrong. He also spoke of it as our conscience. So it's okay if I'm meditating and I hear a voice, but then I need to check in. It's okay if um, a friend calls me up and they said, "Wow, I was praying so deeply and I got a message for you." And they tell me the message. It's okay to listen to the message, but it's not okay to just say, "Oh, well, since they were praying, it must be true." We absolutely must check in with ourselves, check in with that part of us that is connected to God. So let's spend, and when I say must, according to the teaching of Bruno Groening, everyone must follow God, says Bruno, and not listen, meaning not just give our power away to other people or other sources. So let's reflect on all this. Listening deeply inside ourselves, noticing what we feel, taking in the good, checking in, checking in with our thoughts. Is this a true thought and not true thought? Mohandas Gandhi, meaning Gandhi from India, he said, "The only tyrant I will accept is the still, quiet voice inside of me." He wasn't willing to um, follow anything else. That's what he strived to follow. And he was quite courageous. There's one time where he walked into not quite the desert, but a very rocky, remote part of India where there were some basically people living as bandits. We would call, basically pirates on the land. They would rob people and they lived this very nomadic, wild life. And he walked into the middle of this gathering and he said, "All of you are cowards." These are people with guns and knives. He said, because you carry guns. Violence is the way of cowards, he said. And so the leader of that group converted to Gandhi's philosophy and became one of his ardent supporters and followers. And I can only imagine what it'd been like to be Gandhi and to get this guidance, to do what he did and to go out and do it, to walk into this group of basically pirates and insult them in essence. But he was listening. He wasn't listening to his mind. He wasn't listening to people's opinions. He was listening to something very deep inside himself. So the further I go on this path and this teaching, I think it's just becoming simpler and simpler. This call to align with the divine and do what it asks of me. It's not always easy to even know what the divine wants. There's all sorts of thoughts and all sorts of things that get in the way of having a clear sense of what the next right thing is, what the next step is. And then, of course, having the courage to act on it, that requires real trust in God. And so Bruno Groening said a little bit more about the pendulum. Lilo, who was a friend of Bruno's, she wanted to use the pendulum to determine what foods were healthy or not healthy for a friend of hers, a neighbor. Let's see, was it a family? There's someone she knew because they had a weak stomach. And Bruno said about this, whoever uses the pendulum only in this way may do so for the benefit of their neighbor. They must always take the care, though, not to allow themselves to be induced into asking questions that will influence their own personal freedom in making decisions. So that's what Bruno spoke about, is when you give your power away to a voice you hear, or um, a pendulum, or automatic writing, or something in a seance. If you just automatically give your power away, you've literally given your will away. And our will, at least according to Bruno, is one of the fundamental aspects of our being. He said, um, I'll just read it right here. Man acts according to his will. As his will, so his thought. The thought moves the man to deed. And he talked about over and over, he talked about wanting the good, engaging our will to receive what's good. So if we just give our will to another person, to a voice we hear, to a pendulum, we've really, in essence, given ourselves away. So let's really sit with all this idea of giving our will to God, deciding to follow the divine. Now, some people, when they meditate, they hear voices. I'm not wanting to be critical of, and some people get very accurate guidance. The thing is according to Bruno Berni, is we have to check in with that. We can't just do what the voices tell us to do. And interestingly enough, this also applies to thinking. You know, just because we have a thought doesn't mean it's true. Bruno called us to reflect on each thought. And that can seem daunting at first, and it is daunting because we're used to just whatever thoughts come, we're just like, yes, 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 yes. And then so we just start wherever we are and just notice one thought a day. Oh, is that a true thought? And then over time, becoming aware of how a thought feels, whether it feels like a true thought, a helpful thought. And we just start with just one thought. This topic of guidance and is very meaningful and personal to me because I had been on this path about 9 months. I'd had many healings, and my life was completely changed, and I was very happy. Actually, I was really. People say I'm a happy, vibrant person. You should have seen me then. Um, but I was a little frustrated because all these people talked about being guided by Bruno and getting messages from Bruno, and I never got any. I felt the energy very strongly. I had a lot of healings. I felt like I was moving in the right direction in my life, but I didn't hear Bruno's voice. And then one day I was just thinking about something really that was deep and near and dear to my heart, and I heard this voice. In essence, said, "Well, once that happens, that will," and it sounded like Bruno's voice actually in English. Once that once that is healed, and once you it was about romantic partnership, or what I called sacred partnership. One And the voice said, once all the blocks to that are healed, and that will be the deepest healing ever. Which I interpreted that to mean, oh, well, once I find my partner, everything will be great. Um, so, so then my orientation began to shift away from this path, um, away from Bruno Groening as my helper. I was starting to look for a sacred partnership as my spiritual path. And let me tell you, friends, those two thoughts, and again, the first thought was it was something like it was Bruno's voice. It was, once you reconnect to that desire, that will be the deepest healing. The thought was something like that. And then the second thought was, oh my gosh, that's my life purpose, to have a very sacred, holy partnership. I don't know which thought was not true. If both of them were untrue, if it was just the second one, if the first one even was Bruno. But what I didn't do was check in. Is that true? Where is that thought coming from? Is it, I had the thought, oh my gosh, that's Bruno speaking to me, so it must be true. That's a very dangerous way to be, friends. And it took me down a very dark road. And Bruno speaks about that. Here, he spoke about a little bit in Pendulums. We must be discerning on the spiritual path. Absolutely. Just because something sounds good doesn't mean it is good. Just because something sounds like Bruno Groening, it took me down a very dark path and took me very much off this path. So it just comes down to doing what Bruno Groening said: reflect on each thought. Let's see if I can find that. Consider every word and every sentence that you speak and every thought you take up, whether it is worthy to be taken up. And consider everything quite carefully. Call yourself, whether you have acted properly. Call yourself to order. And that's right, Heather. We just start. I'm glad that's helpful. We just start one thought at a time. hey, is this a true thought? If I had done that when those two thoughts came, I would have saved myself a world of hurt. And what I've learned is that everything happens for a reason. And while it took me down a very dark path and a lot of suffering, I learned so much. And on the other side of it, I wouldn't undo it. I wish there had been a gentler way for me to learn some of those lessons. And sometimes the school of life is not gentle. Sometimes it can't be gentle. Sometimes we need a real wake up call. So let's sit with all this reflecting on our thoughts, reflecting on this process of considering each thought. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. I feel like this topic is one of the fundamentals of what Bruno taught, of how we're guided, how we're moved by thoughts, and the necessity to stay centered and not to ignore every word from other people, but not to just blindly accept what other people say, but to really check in to see what our conscience, our soul, which Bruno Groening said is the place where God lives, has to say. So let's really take in a final, in our time together, let's really take in the good. Let's ask for anyone who's in our heart we feel needs some extra goodness. Let's ask for the block we live on, the city we live in, this beautiful planet we live on. And let's have the desire, let's invoke the desire to follow God, which requires trust in God. The way I like to think of it is infinite intelligence is a little smarter than me. Thank you so much for joining in, everyone. Have a beautiful morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care. Much love.